Welcome everybody to a very belated episode of Need Some Introduction. In this episode, I'll be recapping the first two episodes of Noah Hawley's Alien Earth, this new, highly promoted, and apparently very expensive spin-off of the Alien franchise. I'll probably be publishing this right before the third episode will drop, and do expect that conversation with Darren, covering that third episode, to come out about a day after the premiere of the show on FX. The series itself, by the way, premiering on the FX cable network here in the United States, and at the same time, I think simultaneously premiering on Hulu. This is a little different for these FX on Hulu type presentations we've seen previously, probably because of the size of this production. Overseas, I think you'll be watching this on Disney Plus or Hulu, whatever it's branded in your particular territory. There are 8 episodes, the third dropping just in a couple of days as I'll be publishing this episode. I was on vacation and did start recording this. I did watch it right on time as soon as it was available, or a couple hours after. But of course, being on vacation and spending time with the family gets in the way of producing a podcast, as I'm sure you can all relate. I'm assuming, of course, you all have your own podcasts. And by the way, if you do, please do email me, needssomeintroduction@gmail.com, and send me your podcast links. I'd love to listen to them, and I'll promote them here on the show as well. And Darren was also not available to record last week as well, but he did record his thoughts on the first 2 episodes, which I have not yet listened to, by the way, as I'm recording this. So we'll listen to it together about halfway through this episode. When I get through my recap of episode 1, I'll be listening, and including it here, of course, Darren's feedback on these 2 first episodes of the show. Quick news, of course, Darren and I at this point have not had the conversation, but we'll have already published an episode, or I would have already published the episode, in which we discuss the finale of Smoke on Apple TV+. Not a very popular show, but if you have been following along, the show did conclude this week. The season concluded. I think that is a series conclusion, to be honest, considering this is not a popular show and not totally successful, but our thoughts in that podcast episode. And of course, appearing to be picking up traction here as well, we are approaching the end game of the Dexter sequel series. 3 more episodes there, and the most recent episode already published here in the feed. Immediately after that, Sona and I will be discussing Task, the new HBO Max TV series from Brad Inglesby. Another Pennsylvania set thriller, something we've seen quite a few of this past few years. And the premiere date there announced just recently, September 7th. Okay, so episode 1 of Alien Earth is called Neverland. So this series is created by Noah Hawley, who most famously is the showrunner and creator, or one of the creators of the FX series Fargo. And less successful, but an interesting series that also is a science fiction series, also based on, tangentially, on a very large IP, the series Legion, also on FX. Far less successful, I think 2 seasons only of that series. But in a similar vein, FX trying to bring their brand of elevated, FX until recently, or maybe still continues to have a reputation as a streaming service or a content creation service that is usually a cut above the rest, going all the way back when they created The Shield, and some interesting one-off series, maybe not intentionally one-off, but series like Terriers, very highly recommended if you haven't seen that, and a string of experimental and very successful comedies such as Reservation Dogs and What We Do in the Shadows. So in general, on the fringe of the mainstream, and definitely Noah Hawley's series Fargo fits into this. It is an anthology, which nonetheless has overlapping storylines and characters across those seasons, or at least historically connected to each other, since they often take place in different time frames. But more importantly, for the context of this Alien Earth series, it is a mashup not only of the elements from Fargo itself, but of the Coen brothers universe collectively. There are themes, there are parallels between characters that tie together not only this general crime gone bad noirish framework of Fargo itself, the film, but of honestly almost all of the Coen brothers films. So that becomes some context setting for my expectations of Alien Earth, which of course are going to, my assumption of course is, will mash up elements of the Alien franchise itself, and I assume at this point other science fiction concepts and properties as well. So even now, in this early going of the show, we obviously see elements of the first Alien film, the Ridley Scott film from 1977, I believe. Actually, 77 is Star Wars. I think it's 79. Yes, 1979. But Ridley Scott, the director of that film, followed that up with Blade Runner. And these are probably, even now with all the films he's made, the two films that he is most well known for, and that he thematically has circled back to over and over again, especially now late in his career. He came back to the Alien franchise with Prometheus, and then the far less financially successful Alien Covenant, and never finished that trilogy of films. But the things that had been subtextual in the original Alien film, and also in Blade Runner, this future where corporations are more powerful than nations, and technology is displacing our humanity, where we become more and more like insects ourselves, workers within this large industry, and then juxtaposing these high-minded humans struggling to survive like insects within a corporate hive mind, literally confronted with insects that, lacking humanity, are the better survivalists. And the question of that, if survival is truly the end goal for any species, then are the aliens better equipped than the humans? So all of this was on the fringes of the Alien franchise throughout, especially in the first two films, when, of course, we have Alien itself, which is primarily a ghost, a haunted house, or a haunted ship, basically. Honestly, that's basically what it is, like the old school stories of a ship at sea that other pirates come upon or other sailors come upon and get picked off one at a time. And there's something supernatural going on in that ship. Or maybe it's a human being who is killing them off one at a time. So this mashup in and of itself of a monster film, of a slasher movie, which of course very popular in the late 70s, of these science fiction elements that are elevated now, at that moment, coming off of the massive success of Star Wars, a new reinterest in science fiction stories. And apropos to the 70s, also a conspiracy thriller where we discover, spoilers for the first Alien film, that the corporation itself, and before I even put that spoiler in there, just to be clear, if you have never seen the very first Alien film, do yourself a favor. It's a fantastic film, first of all. But it is really the only thing that would be essential viewing so far that I can see for this particular Alien Earth series, which takes place 2 years before the actual events of that first Alien film. So yes, once again, spoilers for that film. Turns out that the corporation has intentionally led this crew in that film to this distress beacon so that they can become infected with this alien life force, or alternately, but equally nefariously, have stumbled upon it, but are more than happy to allow this to happen. And of course, the second best, in my opinion, and I think in almost anyone's opinion, of the series, the James Cameron action, that reinventing the slasher/haunted house thriller of the first film into a military action horror franchise, in and of itself, a genre that became elevated or even more popular in the wake of Aliens. And this franchise has continued for over 40 years now since then. Those are by far, I think, in popular imagination, the most popular versions of those stories, or any Alien story. And it has intersected with the pop culture multiple times. Prometheus was a blockbuster, legitimately at the time, a big hit overseas as well. Alien Romulus, of course, not coincidentally, part of this need for Disney Plus and for FX and all these streamers out there that are making these huge investments in the infrastructure of having a streaming platform. They want content. They want to extend the catalog value of existing properties. So even if the films themselves, even if these new properties do not succeed, it increases the value of the existing Alien films, etc., Marvel films, whatever the franchise happens to be. But in this particular case, these existing Alien films, to wit, taking the franchise back to its origin point. In the case of Alien Romulus, a huge hit last summer, a film that harkens back to the style of the first couple of Alien films. And again, also in production, by the way, simultaneously, this Noah Hawley series, which in its timeline goes back to the very origin of the Alien mythology, 2 years before the very first film. So a little bit of a rewrite of that story, since as far as we knew, and I guess this will muddy the waters here, but will be answered, I'm certain it will be answered in the course of this series of show, that we assumed the xenomorphs were the first time that this corporation had encountered this deadly pathogen, this creature, Apparently, that is not the case because they had seen it here earlier, and presumably, this is me just thinking out loud now, I assume the xenomorph will be dead by the end of this season of the show, and there's more than one, by the way, just minor spoilers for what we see in these first 2 episodes. And maybe they temporarily avert the extinction of humanity by quashing this invasion, but Weyland-Yutani probably diverts its crew, the crew from the Alien 1 film, to intersect with this pathogen once again, this invasive species. Another little primer on Noah Hawley. If you've watched Fargo, and especially if you've read his books, his themes are right out in the open. It's to his credit that he is a interesting enough thinker and writer that he can put his themes first outright, like leading with themes, and somehow still make this material work to varying degrees, by the way. I think that is something that hasn't always worked for him in all of his projects. But so far, in these first 2 episodes of Alien and in Fargo at its best, because that's uneven as well, it is working very well. To that point of how theme forward all of this is, episode 1 of this series is called Neverland. And of course, we think Peter Pan, and they're not subtle about it. That's not the only reference to Peter Pan. There are many, many, many references to Peter Pan to come. And in the opening placard of the series itself, we discover that there are now 5 corporations. Weyland-Yutani, only one of these 5. And these 5 corporations are Prodigy, Weyland-Yutani, of course, we've heard many times before in the Alien franchise, Lynch, maybe a David Lynch reference, Dynamic, and Threshold. The corporation we learned the most about initially is this Prodigy company, led by a child prodigy, Boy Cavalier as he's called. And this, of course, is Peter Pan. He loves Peter Pan. So, like I said, not subtle people. The island compound he lives on is Neverland. He watches Peter Pan and references it many times. And of course, circling back to that opening placard, we discover that, once again, theme forward, the future will be decided by how humanity extends life. So this is the race, the way that right now everybody's in a race for AI. The metaphor for that, which of course includes AI itself, is this world in which the extension of humanity itself will be decided by competing technologies. One, a cyborg. So adding technology to a human being to extend their lives. Number 2, the android, something that we've seen not only in the Alien universe, of course, androids in all of these series, and the mistrust between humans and this technological and intellectual rival potentially. Of course, the core theme of Prometheus and even more so Alien Covenant, some of the most recent episodes of this series of films. But Prodigy has a new technology, new to this universe, the ability of transferring consciousness from a human being into a synthetic body. So with that context setting, we see some of this in action already. The series itself doesn't quite open in Neverland. It actually opens on a ship which beautifully recreates the style of the original Ridley Scott Alien film. In the set, even in these characters, as they are styled, the actors themselves are, once again, something that Noah Hawley does with all of his projects. This remixing, he's done this before with the Fargo show, where this character looks like a character you've seen in a Coen Brothers film before, but acts very differently, actually has the personality of a different character. So this spot the Easter egg type filmmaking, something that he's very familiar with. And if you are a completist, if you've seen all the Alien films, if you love the Alien films, all of them, even the worst ones of them, there are so many Easter eggs here of things that you'll immediately relate to. Oh, I see. That stylistically is in the vein of this other thing that I've seen in a previous film. And this character looks like this other character, but is quite different. To that point, when we see this crew on this ship that's very similar to the mining ship we're going to discover or see in the Alien film, the first one, you may see the characters as they are cast, as they looked, as they are styled, and assume, oh, I know who that is. That is the android, and that is this person, is that person. And it turns out not to be the case at all. The villain here, I mean, at least presumptively at this moment in the show, the villain here appears to be this cyborg character, Morrow, who seems to be controlled by someone. It could be Weyland-Yutani itself, but given what happens next, I'm curious to know who was actually funding this particular part of the mission, or I should say, the final part where the ship actually crashes down. But this Weyland-Yutani ship has been out to the far reaches of space and has returned some biological weapons. I mean, all of these seem to be aggressive life forms. And not just xenomorphs, by the way. This opening sequence very much feels like an accelerated version of that first Alien film, as everybody awakens from their cryo sleep, suspicious of each other. They complain about their wages. It's very much in line with the opening sequences of the first Alien film. But then as they re-enter cryosleep for the last section of their journey, we see these flash forwards, something we haven't seen before stylistically, of what happens to this crew and how they basically, we see them in cryo and then we see them dying. So how each one of these is going to die. Honestly, something intriguing, an intriguing way to introduce these kills. And I guess it accelerates the plot, but maybe it would have been more intriguing to have an episode where this all unfolds. I guess it would have been repetitive considering how many of those we've seen in this series itself. Burrow is the only survivor of this alien attack, and we see a xenomorph as he is eventually, and this is what we discover, he's a cyborg. He has a torch in his arm and uses it a couple times in this episode. And he tucks himself away just in time to avoid the attack of the xenomorph. Now, I'm not fully on board with calling this guy a bad guy yet, because you could say, well, look, he let his crew member die out there. He may have just been buying himself time, knowing that it was futile to escape. And of course, in previous films, it's always the Weyland-Yutani android who turns out to be nefariously working against, not always actually, I take that back, because that is the expectation, it's a stereotype, but of course, there have been variations in the storylines. But the suspicion always falls on the android, in this case, a cyborg, so not quite an android, but this ship eventually will crash land on Earth, but does not crash land in a Weyland-Yutani friendly zone. It crashes into the largest skyscraper in the middle of this Prodigy-controlled continent, it seems to be. But that happens later. So let me reset a little bit. So Prodigy is the newest of these trillion-dollar corporations in this universe. And we meet Cavalier, this genius Peter Pan figure who has come up with a new technology for extending human life and have used children who are dying of cancer. And you can immediately see not only his love for Peter Pan as being an influence here, but you can imagine that in this universe, if you're going to have this procedure done on anybody and you want to raise as few negative critiques as possible, if you have a bunch of children who are dying of brain cancer, who wouldn't be like, well, I'm going to be in the way of you extending these children's lives? And of course, when they upload their minds into different bodies, why would you put them in children bodies? If you wanted them to interact with other people, they'd always interact as children, and they will mature at some point, so you probably want to put them into their human bodies right away. It all seems very rational, but of course, inevitably, they want these people to do labor. They want these people to fight wars. And if there's a bunch of children out there doing labor or fighting wars, it would be bad optics, to say the least. By the way, Boy Cavalier is played by Samuel Blanken. His right-hand woman is played by Essie Davis, very recognizable from The Babadook, if you've ever seen that, this Australian actress. And his right-hand man, both angels on his shoulders. I was going to say like one's an angel and the devil, but they actually are both giving him valid advice that he ignores oftentimes, is a synthetic human, an android, Kirsch, played by Timothy Oliphant, in a really strange styling. I have to say that I'm a huge fan of Timothy Oliphant. I'm not sure this is good casting for him. He is such a charismatic character, and he can play extremely warm, and he can play extremely devilish or sinister even. And maybe that's what they're trying to cast him, because he can play both of these tones, so we don't know whether to trust him or not. But trying to make him play this non-charismatic android is really subverting his best personality features, basically. So I'm not sure this is the right casting, although obviously love the performer. And we meet this young girl, Marcy, who is going to be the very first consciousness transfer into this adult body. And after the transfer, she is Wendy. Wendy, of course, from Peter Pan. And of course, lacking any subtlety once again, we know that Wendy is the nanny/mother figure, but also a slightly flirtatious relationship with Peter Pan himself in the film, in the books. And Wendy, being the first, is in charge of being the leader, being the nanny of these additional lost children, lost boys and girls who follow her with the same procedure. A couple of early details here that are interesting. One is that the Kirsch character has this moment that foreshadows what is probably yet to come, and definitely foreshadows what we've seen, an affinity between the android and the alien, where he shows all this sympathy for this trapped scorpion. And of course, you see the scorpion, and we know the alien mythology. You can't help but not draw a parallel between the scorpion and the alien creature. And right away, we start thinking some fascinating elements of this. You put this child into this adult body, uncomfortable with the breasts and the female form and the largeness of the body itself, and asks the question, why? Why would you do this? As I mentioned earlier, it does make sense, right? You have to assume that this is a product that you're creating, will have to interact with many different types of people. If you put it into a child's body, this is a much more limited audience for this type of employee, if you want to call it that, and the type of roles they can fit into. But of course, the question of why. Why would we need them to look like adults at all? Of course, this is going to be labor in the future. We need them to fit in. We need them to be stealthy, maybe even. And now, of course, we suddenly have this child inside of this nearly indestructible body. We even see in the backstories or in the introduction to some of these other children, some of them are paralyzed, some of them have other debilities. So in a way, they have this fantasy life, this freedom they've never had before. And of course, we think about another James Cameron film, Avatar, and how the protagonist there is able to walk for the first time, or run in a very long time, I should say, when he enters this avatar body. So all questions raised here by this particular transfer of consciousness. Interestingly, Kirsch asks, how do her emotions feel? And she's that they are quiet, they're muted, because her body, the synthetic body, does not have hormones. So the programming, I should say, is trying to simulate what the emotions are. But these are just signals that signify the emotion that they would be feeling. She doesn't actually have a body, a biochemical body, feeding fear or happiness or any emotion into the brain. There's this argument later between Essie Davis and Kirsch, the Timothy Oliphant character, where he says, why do we treat her like a human? She's not a human. Can we just acknowledge the fact that she's not human anymore? So he, as an android, sees this new life form, and immediately sees it. She is an android like me. She thinks like me. Essie Davis, still human, sees this new life form and thinks it is a human. The vessel has changed. The body is different, but it is still a human mind inside of the vessel. And this, of course, is the whole mind-body question. Again, this idea that the mind travels inside of the body, but is the mind separate from the body? The body is purely a vessel. So is this newly transferred consciousness into a body? Is it the human that is now piloting the body, or is the body simply controlled by the mind, but now it is a new thing? It is not a human anymore. It is possibly more like Kirsch, more just an android with programming. And I assume that this is a question this series will continue to explore, because we know that a lot of the rash decisions that are made in this first episode of the show negate the fact that this is a new life form inside of this different body. The human that this person was before, that Wendy was before, is dictating all the actions and maybe bad decisions being made in this particular episode. I want to call out here that Sydney Chandler, Kyle Chandler's daughter, by the way, regardless of the whatever nepotistic elements there are to that, she does a great job in these first episodes. I love how she's channeling the idea of this child still inside this body, awkward in the body, but enjoying being in this body, but also just training wheels are still on to some extent, and seeing her evolve her performance and performing herself to act like, I know what I'm doing. I'm an adult. I'm pretending to be this soldier at war later in episode 2, performing for her brother when she eventually runs into him. But then when just having this conversation with Sylvia, the Essie Davis character, showing all of the behavioral tics she had as a child. So subtle and interesting performance here. There's also this really cool visualization showing each of the children becoming the next of this new breed of humanity. And they stepped off after the mind transfer, stepped off of this table, and then the camera pans back around and there's another one and another one. It's a very cool accelerated way to just explain how all of these characters are now becoming part of this new family. And it's also an assembly line at the same time. Very cool, very interestingly done. And at this point, we hear on the a narration, a section of the Peter Pan story where the description is that Neverland, suddenly there were more shadows. There was something coming. Something was looming. A new darkness was coming. And in the context of the story, it's this loss of innocence. It's the end of childhood and the beginning of adulthood. And of course, that is also metaphorically, this Neverland is about to be punctured by the arrival of not a giant ship, but, or I should say not a sea ship, but a spaceship. And of course, now we jump back to that crash I hinted at earlier in this recap. We see that the ship is about to crash into a satellite and then into Earth itself. And rather than if it was targeting Weyland-Yutani, it actually crash lands right in the heart of this prodigy city, New Siam, as it is called. And we are already seeing these startup cities, by the way, these coastal islands that are being purchased by libertarian billionaires to start whole new societies. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing corporate nation states as a reality in the next decades. Honestly, I have to say I was kind of shocked that we see a xenomorph this early on. Maybe I was expecting to see the face grabber or something, but seeing a fully fledged old school, very much in the styling of the original xenomorph right in the first third of this first episode of the show. Pretty surprising that we got here so fast. In the meantime, we see that Wendy has been stalking via technology her brother, who thinks she's dead. His name is Hermit, by the way, and just a little aside here, very much something that was on my mind as I watched this. The day that I watched this series, we were on a boat excursion. We had a great presentation by the captain explaining how lobsters, we were up in Maine, and of course there's a huge lobster trade up there, and explaining how the lobsters every single year, they lose their shell and then they fill it with water to expand it to a larger size. And then they grow to fill the shell. And then the next year they find a safe place. They molt that shell again. They have a soft shell. They inflate it with water again. The shell hardens and they grow into that. And I couldn't help but think about that. Of course, aliens are basically space lobsters, very, very large ones. And the idea, of course, that this constantly evolving and expanding creature. But Wendy's brother, his name is Hermit. And if you know anything about hermit crabs as well, other crustaceans, that they will grow, they will find a shell that they will grow into. And then once they have outgrown that shell, they need to find another shell to capture or accommodate their larger size until they outgrow that one, etc., and so forth. So the idea that Wendy is now in this new body, like a hermit crab, she has not yet grown to fill it, but will she outgrow it at some point? Will she evolve the way that these alien creatures can as well? Interesting at one point, by the way, that she says, I miss eating, which made me think about the conundrum of if we were going to actually put a human consciousness into a synthetic body, would we have to allow them to eat? The reason I mention this is because eating as a human takes up a huge amount of energy. Like we waste so much energy eating. Some creatures have like limited brain space because they require so much energy not to fire the brain, but to just eat all day long, whether it's a cow who's constantly chewing grass or a bird constantly eating seeds. So the digestive process is such an energy intensive process. So it would be a terrible idea to basically build technology that needs to eat, because it would require a huge expenditure of energy. Like basically just cutting out food will reduce energy costs by a huge amount. However, I miss eating, right? Like if you're a person, one of the great pleasures in life, of course, is eating. How do you put a human consciousness into a synthetic body and not give them the ability to eat? They have to at least be able to taste food, even if they spit it out afterwards. That's kind of gross, but I mean, don't you think, right? It's like when you taste the wine and you spit it out afterwards. So anybody out there, I'm sure it's already happening out there. You're designing those synthetic bodies. You got to give them, even if there's a little flap in the back that, just back of their neck, not getting too gross about it, that ejects the food after it's done. You got to give them the ability of at least enjoying food. And of course, these two storylines come together. The ship has crashed into the city. Wendy, who's been stalking her brother this whole entire time, notices that one of the soldiers who is being deployed by Prodigy to investigate this crash, to rescue people within the building, and of course see what's on board that ship. Very importantly, of course, Boy Cavalier, Kid Cudi, I almost said, Boy Cavalier is very curious as to what might be on that ship. So Wendy, of course, wants to go as well to rescue her brother. And of course, Boy Cavalier that's his name, he's Cavalier, is on board with this because he finds it intriguing. He finds it intriguing that this girl, now given this infinite life in this new body, is still so connected to her brother. And he's also probably curious to see, well, how will these indestructible alien android bodies do in this new circumstance? Hey, that's another use case for them as well. Kirsch thinks this is a bad idea, but Kirsch ends up having to go as well. Oh, a couple of interesting things I should call out. One is that we have seen that she can not only has trained herself somehow to be able to commune with technology, she's able to actually send a message to her brother at one point, but very limited. But this isn't something she innately can do. It's something that she has somehow figured out how to do. So again, Boy Cavalier, very curious as to how she's evolving her skills, and also that this drive of hers is related directly to this desire to want to rescue her brother. He even says at one point saying that if I didn't know better, I'd say we're human. And she says, I am human. They talk like she's not even in the room. When they ask her, can you follow orders? And she says, yes, sir. It also made me think about how this is also potentially a metaphor for the military in general. Think about in previous generations, even historically hundreds of years ago, where soldiers were oftentimes very young, teenagers or barely adults. And in the same way that we're saying, wow, we can't send these kids into battle. Is she ready for this? And of course, the question becomes, can we send 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds into battle? Or like I said, generations ago, 14-year-olds in the Civil War, for example, into battle. Are they prepared? But we do it all the time. And also that these quote unquote children were so precious that we can't risk them for any, in the same way that we oftentimes look at children and think about how precious they are. And then suddenly this situation arises where, oh, maybe there's some financial benefit here. They suddenly are disposable in the same way that when we suddenly throw our kids into a war, historically, they go from being incredibly precious commodities to being completely disposable and unprepared for whatever they're going to encounter. Meanwhile, in the ship ahead of Wendy and her crew, there are the soldiers that have been going in there, clearing out the building, I should say. And some of them have gone onto the ship. By the way, the poor actor who had a breakout year playing Gaitok on The White Lotus, can't remember the actor's name now. I'll try to look it up for the next recap episode. Doesn't get much screen time here, ends up becoming food for this other really disgusting life form that they run into here. They end up in the lab. So we've seen the xenomorph, of course. We have this eyeball that can possess a life form by crawling into its eye socket. Pretty disgusting. A lot of body horror here. There are these leech-like creatures, the one that kills Gaitok here. They fill up with blood and then roll away. And then there is this, we'll see more of it in the second episode, we have this flora that presents itself as fauna, or I should say fauna that presents itself as flora, as it is described by Kirsch later on. And we haven't seen this thing in full flower, no pun intended, yet. This perhaps might be a reference to The Thing. Maybe another mashup here. We have elements of The Thing, possibly. We have elements of Blade Runner. And of course, the previous Alien films. And who knows, Predator 2? Who knows? These soldiers, by the way, become prey to these slug-like creatures because Morrow gets the drop on them. And what is his mindset? It seems like once again, my theory is that they didn't land here accidentally. They came here, Morrow was intending to crash into Prodigy territory because Prodigy wanted to get their hands on this technology and wanted the plausible deniability that, well, we only got there first because you landed in our backyard. But I think that might all be subterfuge. And this episode culminates with a conversation between Wendy and Kirsch, where Kirsch talks about humanity in general, saying that you used to be food, and then you built these incredible machines, and you stopped being food, or you convinced yourself that you're no longer food. And that's what it is to be an animal. Being an animal, being in the natural world, means that you are always part of the food chain. In a way, he's challenging her to outgrow her humanity, that it is a weakness. And of course, thematically, this is very much the themes of Alien itself. When you think about the complexity of human life and our emotional lives and our creative minds and these things we invent, these things we build, these films we make, these books we write to explain our own existence, when in the end we can be easily exterminated by a single-minded insect that just wants to breed, feed, and kill. And as far as nature is concerned, they are the more efficient and more successful species, as opposed to the fragility of the human conscious that will endanger itself and endanger those around it. You think about Wendy recruiting these children completely out of their depth into this mission that she has undergone because she is trying to rescue her brother. So these aren't even stakes for these other kids. They're purely for her. And she has dragged people into this because in her mind, she's endangering them. They probably will survive this considering their synthetic bodies, but synthetic bodies could be destroyed beyond damage as well, damage beyond repair, and yet risking it all for the survival of one, something that an alien would not do. So this, of course, is what makes us human. This, of course, is maybe our greatest failing from the point of view of our own survival. And of course, subtext to all of this, I am pretty sure this will be overt text and overt text over the course of the alien film mythology as well. Probably not a coincidence that these corporations always seem to take the side of the aliens. They're always trying to capture the aliens and harness them as a weapon, even though potentially this could be an extermination level event. Something, by the way, that Kirsch understands, that this is an invasive species and could exterminate the entire population if it is not contained. And yet the corporations are fighting over it. So over and over again, we see the corporations soulless and single-mindedly trying to grow and propagate and survive like these creatures, these aliens, like an invasive species, to the detriment, potentially, of humanity around them. And Noah Hawley, of course, definitely was a headbanger back in his day, ends episode 1 with some Sabbath, but this is Dio Sabbath, not Ozzy Sabbath. This is 80s Sabbath, not 70s Sabbath. R.I.P. Ozzy. Okay, let's hear what Darren had to say about these 2 episodes before I get into my own notes on episode 2.
G'day there, Victor. I am sorry that I can't be with you for this first episode to have a chat about Alien Earth. I've had to do a CPR course for work today, so I'm recording my thoughts a little bit later. I hope you enjoyed it. Spoiler alert, I really enjoyed both of these episodes. I think they were fantastic science fiction with a little bit of horror elements or just some hardcore gore at some stages. It was pretty full on, especially that second episode. Stoked to see this as a series, stoked to see the alien lore expanded in all sorts of different ways. And one of the things that I was a bit reticent about was seeing the aliens on Earth, which we've never seen apart from those Alien vs. Predator movies. But I think it's set up to be really well done. And I am stoked with Noah Hawley, the way that he's written and directed the first episode. I thought the pilot, if you can call it that, because I'm sure that they planned it as a whole series, not just a one-off episode to see whether it got the funds to make the rest. It was stunning. It was a stunning piece of television. Very assured in the directing and the writing, and super interesting. So the opening titles were very cool. It was what we expect from Alien, and the way that the letters kind of reveal themselves, and we saw all sorts of different creatures in the background, I thought was cool. Now, there was a bit at the start about, I think it was hybrids and cyborgs and like synthetics that we're used to. So I think the hybrids are very new for this series. I'm not sure about the cyborgs, whether they existed in the Alien universe before, but it seems like, especially with the introduction of this kind of Peter Pan character and the Lost Boys, his children, which he's grabbed these brains and consciousness from dying children and put them into essentially androids to become these hybrids. There's heaps of scope to go there and to kind of mix it up between the synthetics and the cyborgs, and who is kind of the true, I think they said it's a race to the future, and one of these kind of beings is going to rule over the others. There's a few little lines about that with predators and animals were once food, and now we we kind of ruled for a number of years and now we might become food again. I think that was what Timothy Olyphant's character was saying in the second episode, who I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I think he's one of the traditional androids or the synthetics that we're used to in the past in this universe. I think. I haven't kind of sat down to analyze this show very closely because I was just enjoying it. I was just enjoying the way that it was played out, and the action was great, and the kind of cerebral kind of stuff was very interesting, and there's a way to go, right? What I found interesting is that at the start of all Alien films, it kind of unravels, as in they find the eggs, then the little crab crawlers come out and they attach to a host, and then the chest burster bursts out. There's none of this. I don't think we haven't seen a chest burster yet. We haven't. We've only just seen the eggs. This all happens very quickly in the background. By the way, seeing the ship, I forget what the ship's name is, but it's very similar to the Nostromo in the very first Alien film, and it was very fantastic to see such a familiar design and the production design that takes from the first Alien. I mean, that production designer just nailed it straight away, and it's influenced so much since then. And to see the mother with all the LED lights or whatever they are in the cockpit, to see the captain talk to mother, it was so cool. Now, this captain, he's got a bit of work to do in this series. Now, he's a cyborg, so he can kind of change his arm into tools or weapons or keys possibly, and he is super calm in a crisis. And I guess it's his responsibility to capture these aliens and the crabs and all sorts of things as they're trapped on Earth. Introducing this Peter Pan character, this kind of boy trillionaire, fine, okay. He could easily become a little bit tiresome or a little bit more of like a character that we're used to in this world. But the way that they set it up with the different companies, he's part of this prodigy company, and they're rivals with the Weyland-Yutani company. Now, I think Weyland was played by Lance Hendrickson back in the day. We haven't seen Weyland yet, but Yutani is a female character, a supposed trillionaire or whatever. And so it's going to be interesting to see how far she comes into this story. How cool was the spaceship crashing in a like an international city? I think it's supposed to be Kuala Lumpur or something, in Malaysia. That's what it seemed to be. A very international cast, which I really liked. A lot of unfamiliar faces, especially on the ship that crashes. I was kind of wondering who to pay attention to, and which characters to kind of see to get attached to, because it was very cool the way that it echoed remnants of the first movie with when they wake up from their sleep and they're kind of firing barbs back and forth with each other. It was pretty funny that I think they're all dead now. But apart from perhaps the captain, and maybe there was another weird guy on the ship who got a bit of attention in those early scenes. I haven't seen him since, but I reckon he's got something to do with it later on. Yeah, all that crew gone, dead, slaughtered in the background, or some just done away with by one alien or a few aliens. I'm not quite sure. Okay, so the whole thing about Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, I mean, one of the kids is actually named Smee in it. A little bit on the nose for me. I don't mind Wendy. She's cool. But we'll see where that goes and how far they take that whole Peter Pan thing, because I could get tired of it pretty quickly, unless that they really work it in a way that makes sense. But I'm a little bit apprehensive there. And like I said about the boy character, the boy trillionaire, I'm a little bit, he could go either way. So we'll see what happens. Talking about the international cast, I really like seeing Essie Davis. We got to talk about The Slap every week, and she's part of the cast of The Slap. And she was also in an amazing film called The Babadook. She's super cool. I really loved to see her aging in such an elegant way. She looks stunning in this. Timothy Olyphant, cool. I go way back to seeing him in Go. I think he's a cool character, and he's playing like, he reminded me of, we were talking about Blade Runner last week. He reminded me of Rutger Hauer, I think it is, in Blade Runner. Very similar look. And so I'm thinking he's just one of these synthetics. Who else is in the cast? Oh, I do like the guy from Andor, from the first series of Andor. He is a cool character. At the end of the second episode, he's been taken away by a particularly aggressive alien, but I don't think he's dead yet because he seems to be driving the story along with his hybrid sister, which is super interesting. And just on Andor, I mean, seeing the designs of the Yutani ship crashing in this city, I mean, it just looks like big budget, smart science fiction, which is what Andor was as well. So to see an actor that kind of straddles both worlds is really cool, and I think it lends, you know how much I love Andor, it lends a lot of credibility to this show too. So yeah, stoked to see that. The second episode seemed like all action. The way that this spaceship has crashed into the building, I mean, you've almost got like a ready-made single location with all sorts of floors that the alien and the characters can navigate between the ship and between this building. So far, all the action is set there, which I'm fine with. I don't know how many episodes they're going to go with that or whether they're going to spread out. But I mean, it's a cool little playground that's set up from the first floor, like shopping center, as you go up the stairwells and the kind of middle of the building, which is completely gone. And this threat that the building is going to could collapse at any moment. Yeah, super wicked. Now, the new kind of creatures are cool, but I'm a little bit apprehensive about the CGI. The CGI stands out quite a lot, especially that flower thing that was hanging down. Is it flora? Is it fauna? Kind of a little pokey thing that sticks out and has a look around. I'm not super sold on that CGI, and also the little eyeball octopus thingy. It's fun. It's not scary. I do want to see what this flower thing does though. But yeah, it's fun, but it's not the kind of practical effects that I was hoping for. The alien is definitely scary though. We don't see much of it. We see just enough. The couple of scenes where it absolutely destroys a room, multiple rooms, while the camera is kind of focused on a main character or somewhere else is so cool. It is wicked to see the tail flashing, and then you see what's happened to the people that are in the room. It is just full on, and I wasn't expecting to see such carnage so early in this series. And especially that amazing apartment with those the weird kind of Victorian era girls and guys. I'm gonna have to watch that again. That was quite incredible. What else did I like? Oh, at the end of the second episode, there's a number of cool needle drops in this, and I'm a massive Tool fan from back in the day. I used to listen to Anima. I used to listen to the album Lateralis on repeat, and to hear a Tool song close out the episode and play through the credits, I was a massive fan. So it was really cool to hear that. They're a type of band who uses kind of H.R. Geiger imagery in their video clips and in their kind of persona. So it was really cool to see them blended into the alien world. Massive fan. And I am really looking forward to the next episode. So yeah, looking forward to having a chat with you to see what you thought. Noah Hawley, I think he's knocked this one out of the park. I'm not sure how many episodes. I think it's 8 episodes of this. I don't know. But I cannot wait for the next one. And yeah, interested to hear your thoughts. All right, thanks so much, Victor. I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, agree with just about everything Darren said there. This is why I like having a co-host, by the way. He touches on a bunch of things that I noticed, of course, but didn't even bring up in my recap up to this point. So let me touch on some of the things he brought up that I think were worth discussing further. One is, of course, the title the sequence itself, but the reveal of the letters on the screen. Of course, this has been a motif in all the previous Alien films. How are you going to reveal these characters? There's always a slightly different version of it. These letters appearing on this in a strange way, right? This alien future, these alien creatures, and what are the characters appearing on the screen, the actual spelling out this Alien Earth title. So very cool callback to, of course, the previous Alien films there, even in the title or the use of the titles themselves. And of course, he brings up an excellent point, which is over and over again, there's a certain formula here, like a slasher movie. There is the whole discovery of the eggs and the face hugger and someone gets infected. And yes, we don't see it. As a matter of fact, we see that whole massacre happens in these flashes as people are going back into cryosleep early on in that first episode. And but we do see, for example, he mentions there's this creepy character who likes to watch people sleeping. That character eventually shows up with the chest burst, and there is a face hugger there as well. So presumably this person who didn't wake up from that cryosleep maybe intentionally kept sleeping because was already infected with one of the xenomorphs. And of course, that is probably the one that hatched. There are eggs, of course. He mentions this. I guess this is in episode 2. I'll be breaking that down in more detail. But we do see that there have been eggs. Where did the eggs come from? We have not seen, at least not yet, a mother alien laying these eggs. So where did they come from? And of course, one of the most obvious things to bring up, I mentioned Noah Hawley as a creator of the show in general, but also the director of episode 1. Very well directed, that first episode. Excellent. There are 8 episodes, by the way. He asked that question. There are 8. I don't know how many Hawley directed. He definitely directed the first. I assume he'll direct the last or another important episode, but maybe even more than that. Episode 2, we'll be breaking it down in just a moment. Way more action heavy, a lot less plot, a lot less themes, a lot less character introduction, but still a lot of that as well. But of course, primarily an action episode. Some details about this captain character from the episode 1, Burrow, I think his name is Murrow, who mentions to the soldiers that they have to stay calm. He stays cool as ice, and he knows that this is a way to prevent the creature from killing, because he survives this attack from the alien creature by staying calm. If it was just that easy, man, I wish everybody knew this. And maybe these androids will be, without fear, will be immune to attacks from this alien. Everything said about Essie Davis. Yes, terrific performer. Yes, in the slap, another great performance she gave there. Something we've been discussing, that old series here. And yes, she has aged beautifully. I mean, the slap is 10 years old, more than 10 years old. If you've seen that series or you have watched it along with us in our recent conversations about it, a show that Darren discovered recently and then I watched with my wife as well. And Essie Davis in that as well. And stunning, still beautiful after 10 years since that show, and aging beautifully. And giving a terrific performance, not only just her appearance, but the gravitas she brings to her performance. And he made an excellent point that I did not consider. The unworldly, blonde, eyebrowed Timothy Oliphant does remind me of Rutger Hauer, something I didn't even look for, even though I made the connection that it really feels like, of all the things that Noah Hawley is mashing up in this new series, Blade Runner definitely seems to be part of that concoction. And once again, we will not see, they can't overtly use things from Blade Runner in this series because the IP is not owned. It's not all under the Fox and now Disney umbrella. Unlike Predator and Alien, which can cross-pollinate because they're both owned by Fox and now Disney via Fox, the Fox acquisition, but not Blade Runner. But I feel more and more so that Ridley Scott, who directed both those films, has just stylistically winked at the Blade Runner universe as if these are really in a shared universe. Oh, and a couple of great shout outs. Of course, Timothy Oliphant in general, anything he's been in. But I mean, if you ever saw Deadwood, for example, he's so great in that. But he's going all the way back to, yes, Go, great film, Go, so entertaining. And even Scream 2, great in Scream 2. Anything he's been in. Of course, Justified, of course. A couple more shout outs here that he mentioned. Andor. Absolutely incredible. If you're not a Star Wars fan, I know a few of you out there have emailed me saying, I didn't listen to your Andor coverage because I'm not a Star Wars fan. You do not need to know anything about Star Wars to watch Andor, and it's great. And if you like Alien, you like these thematically rich science fiction worlds, Andor is the best example of it. And don't worry, if you have never seen Star Wars, trust me, You don't need to know anything about Star Wars to watch that series. And lastly, of course, this is not only a mashup of all of these other Alien movies previously, and the comics as well, I'm sure, but the video games. Also, there's a whole subgenre of video games, and Darren mentioned the fact that this moving from the ship as the ship settles and going from one location to the next is very much in the lineage of some of these science fiction horror games like Dead Space, for example, but even the other Alien video games as well. So all of that is at play here in this series. And I can't wait to have the conversation with Darren when we discuss episode 3 in just a few more days. Okay, episode 2 of the series is called Mr. October. This, of course, refers to Reggie Jackson, always in the postseason, always in October, always a great player, but clutch, so clutch in playoff games. And we find out here that Hermit was a big baseball fan. This is a way that he connected to his father. He still communes with this memory of his father through his love of baseball and listening to these old games. And of course, we find a actual ball here hit by Reggie Jackson back during one of these World Series runs. As they investigate the ship itself, this ghost ship, we see that people have interacted with the facehuggers. There are some chest-bursted bodies as well. So maybe there will be a flashback episode, because some of this is more than just winking at things we know happened, because the exact how that some of this stuff happened is extremely intriguing, because people would have to have been infected with the alien and other crew members would have to be participating in this. But of course, they would have eventually been exterminated. So there is some more mystery to what happened here on the ship. And maybe that will become clearer as we understand what this broader conspiracy was. So some of these elements really are more background elements in the Alien franchise in general, a little bit more to the fore, but the ghost ship, the conspiracy where agents within the crew are intentionally trying to transport the creature, infect others in the crew members with it as well. Back in Neverland, we find out, or we hear from Cavalier, that he is explaining that overtly again, that this is an intelligence race. And the idea is, how do we live once we are in a world without death? Do we use this technology to advance humanity, or will the machines eclipse humans completely so that we will become extinct in another way, culturally irrelevant, next to these super intelligent and immortal machines? And if people can truly live forever, how do they become more than just consumers forever? And that's actually, honestly, something that I think about all the time. I try to teach my daughter to curate her life experience to some extent. Because if you are simply just consuming what TikTok tells you, or what your social media feed tells you, or just reacting to the deluge of crap that's thrown at you, usually intentionally, easily to absorb, and low friction fast food culture, I do think to myself, like, what is all this extra life, all this extra time, all this extra convenience that the modern world gives us? What is it for if we are becoming, more shallow and more dumb along the way? So are we purely consumers in every way? The things we buy, the lifestyles we choose, the media we consume. And if we are purely consumers, then again, this almost comes like full circle. Have we evolved to simply become worker drones that work mindlessly and consume mindlessly? And then what really differentiates us from these alien-like creatures? Boy Cavalier does tell the S.E. Davis character that he needs some stimulation. He wants somebody who is smarter than him. She takes a little insult to this, but he means, yes, you're smart, but I want someone to blow my mind. And maybe it is these new evolved humans living in these immortal bodies. Oh, he also brings up an interesting point that Kirsch is like AI, like the metaphor for AI now, where isn't he intelligent? And if you've ever talked to an AI chatbot, which I find very entertaining, by the way, just to work thoughts out But if you do think about it, and I do not believe that AI at this point has a personality, just to be clear about this, although some people do have these personal relationships with their AI chatbots. But it is interesting if you imagine that there is some intelligence there. The intelligence is very robotic. It has information, and it can regurgitate things like, well, this is the consensus that everybody seems to agree on this, or here's a few different perspectives on that thing. But it really is just somebody, or if you want to call it a body at all, but a tool really that is facilitating something that is convenient and is true oftentimes and is useful, but it's not a unique perspective. It is not human, to put things succinctly. But I do wonder if Kirsch has more personality than we are giving him credit for. Okay, back at the crash site, some critiques here of the action here. This is very action-heavy episode, entertaining for sure. Way too many. What is this stylistic choice? Obviously, this has been made holistically. It's not just in the first episode. This stylistic choice to have this shower of sparks continuously falling down. Like, what is causing all these sparks? It's happening at the crash site in the building. It happened outside of the building when they were approaching the building. They're like backlit with this shower of sparks. It's happening inside the ship. Everything has this shower of sparks coming down. It's very intentional. And honestly, I don't like it. I hope there's less of it as we descend further and further into the building. The other very funny thing, of course, is I guess one of the technologies that they can take credit for is very quickly opening and closing elevator doors, because Hermit runs into this, again, shocking, as Darren mentioned, that we are seeing a full-fledged xenomorph stalking people and ripping them apart here in the first and second episodes of this show already. This xenomorph, beautifully rendered, practical effect, I think. Oh, one more thing I wanted to bring up on Darren's commentary. Yes, the CGI, especially for some of these new creatures, kind of cheesy, but the alien, mostly practical and looks fantastic. So yeah, in general, I'm in agreement with Darren, especially with horror films, and this is kind of a horror series. The more practical, the more successful you usually are. So yeah, I'm curious to see how they use the CGI for these other creatures, and it all remains to be seen. This is where we see explicitly some of what I mentioned earlier in this recap, in flashback, of course, that Wendy has this ability of communicating via technology. This is part of what is intriguing Cavalier about her. And Wendy and company show up at the crash site, and pretty quickly she's able to track down Hermit. Yutani has reached out to Cavalier. She says, I think you have something of ours. And he says, it fell from the sky and broke one of my buildings. So they'll need to negotiate this. But of course, he's very curious as to what might be on that ship. And I'm very curious to see what they're seeding here if this storyline continues. This idea that it is a Cold War between all of these mega corporations, which of course exists even now, but is going to be much more pronounced when you eventually consider these corporations becoming nation states themselves. Interesting detail here. It happens with Wendy, perhaps only with Wendy, I believe, that she is hearing this sound at the crash site, which I believe is communication among or from the alien itself. So will she at some point be able to communicate with these creatures would be an interesting revelation here for sure. These children in these bodies start to get frightened. Kirsch says to them, is that fear you're feeling? Fear is for animals. Why would you be scared? We see the eyeball, this is when they're in the lab now, we see the eyeball creature in full effect is crawled into this cat with a broken back, no less, into its eye socket, is able to control the front of its body. And then we get to that scene that Darren teased in his commentary as well. This incredible moment where you see these really douchey rich people who are saying that I do not need to leave the building. I'm a very important person. Someone would have reached out to me directly if this was truly something important. And of course, the alien, thank you very much, arriving at the perfect moment to kill all of these douchey people. And very haunted house, once again, the idea that this whole massacre happens behind that closed door. And then we walk into it only in the aftermath, and this incredible milieu of all these, French aristocratic dressed costumed rich people, or bloodied and in these poses practically of as they sat, I should say, when they died. And the host of the party apparently crawling away, bisected basically, and still functional enough to crawl away. And again, if we need any kind of on the nose metaphor of some of the things that are being represented here, of course, the metaphor of the French aristocracy unaware of this revolution that's literally about to occur in their culture. So maybe they'll show up in another room and Nero, someone dressed as Nero, will be fiddling, perhaps. It all remains to be seen. Kirsch, meanwhile, has found the computer and downloaded the entire log of the mission to this point. So I'm sure we'll have much more information about what exactly happened. And maybe that's the mechanism. Rather than having a flashback episode, maybe we simply can get information from Kirsch via this download. Curious to see if Kirsch is going to be forthright about this. So far, he does not seem to be or have a nefarious agenda so far. As a matter of fact, he seems to, partially because of this download, I believe, fully understand the risk of this life form. Just as it seems that Hermit might actually be killed by the alien creature. He's found the Mr. October baseball at this point. But Morrow shows up and with an electric weapon is able to stun the alien and then suppress it with this foam that he lays over it. So he seems to have a lot of experience with containing this creature. Again, making me wonder what the actual purpose of that mission was and how Morrow was supposed to retrieve these creatures. Not caught off guard, but actually intentionally this was the plan. Now, whether that was the original plan of the space mission itself or a byproduct of that mission, yet to be seen. Clearly, these soldiers eventually do not pay attention to Morrow's warning. Don't show them fear. And apparently this is how he's able to survive. So curious to understand this a little bit more. Why does the alien kill everybody it encounters, but not Morrow? It could be because of the fear factor, or it could be that Morrow has helped it survive multiple times now. So he may just see it as an asset. Maybe he's smart enough to strategize. Wendy is with Smee. Yes, all these names, by the way, from Peter Pan. Intentionally so, by the way. I know this irritated Darren in his commentary, but they are choosing characters from the movie that they have seen many, many times before. So I guess it kind of makes sense. I assume the other characters we have spent less time with will also have Peter Pan referencing names. And Smee is incapable, very funny, by the way, incapable of being able to keep the secret that Wendy's actually Hermit's sister, and he tests her a few times and she passes, and then he realizes it's true. And he barely has time to process all this because, of course, they are trying to escape this one creature and trying to understand the risk on this ship itself. And at this point, everyone starts heading towards the front of the ship where apparently they have found via this security footage the eggs. There are eggs that have been laid, alien eggs with facehuggers in them. Of course, we have found in the bodies earlier in this very episode people with facehuggers on their faces with chest bursters have burst. That doesn't seem to be only one. There may be more than one, and that would make sense if the eggs were laid once they arrived on the ship. So there may be a matriarch here as well. Kirsch, of course, warns them all. That's when he warns them that this is a serious threat. We could be talking about the extermination of the human race if this thing is not contained. And the final beat on the episode is a perfect tackle from this alien, taking Hermit out once they've arrived. He's literally leaning into one of these facehugger moments. You think that this is the moment that Hermit will probably get the facehugger, which would be very much in line with the expectations of an alien film. But no, the alien is there and tackles him onto a lower level of this wreckage. And presumably, Wendy is going to go and rescue him. All to the soundtrack of Tool, Stinkfist. A great needle drop here at the end of this episode. If you're a fan of this type of music, which Noah Hawley apparently is, as is Darren. And that's where we leave things for episode 2, Mr. October. Who is Mr. October here? Wendy in the clutch, I presume. I guess we'll know more in episode 3. All right, that's our recap episode of episode 3 should be available within a day or two of this episode dropping once again, because we got around to it so late, vacation, scheduling conflicts, etc. But we will plan to continue to cover Alien Earth for the next 6 weeks in that Wednesday night time frame for the remainder of the run. And then a whole bunch of other shows coming, very interesting shows throughout the rest of the year and into next year. The pipeline now full of really interesting product now that we have gotten past the delays of the writer's strike and even some remaining COVID hangover. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that, and we will all talk to you soon.